My name is Sarah, and the day my mother tried to steal the $4,850,000 my grandpa left me, I was sitting in a courtroom, watching a single sheet of paper decide all of our lives. The judge's voice was flat as he read through my grandfather's will while my mother sat beside her lawyer, with that tight, hungry smile I knew too well. She thought she had already won. I kept my eyes on the document in his hands. I already knew about the fortune Grandpa left me and the tiny token he left to her. What I did not know, what none of us knew, was what waited at the very end of that page. My mother leaned closer, whispering through clenched teeth. "When this is over, you are signing everything over to me. Do you understand?" I did not answer. I locked my jaw and felt my nails bite into the wooden bench. She believed this hearing was her chance to take what she thought she deserved. She had no idea that Grandpa had left one last trap with her name on it. The judge turned to the final line and adjusted his glasses. The room went so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "As for my daughter," he read, "if she chooses to challenge my wishes." My mother's face turned ghost white before he even finished the sentence. That was the moment I realized how far Grandpa had gone to protect me, and how vicious this war over his money was about to become. If you want to hear how a grieving granddaughter turned her mother's greed into the ultimate revenge, stay with me until the very end, and do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you will not miss what happens next. Long before that courtroom, my life had already been split in two: the world I had with my grandfather, and the world I had without him. With Grandpa, things were simple. He did not have to say much to make me feel seen. When my parents forgot school plays, birthdays, even my high school graduation, he was always there in the front row, clapping like I was the only person on the stage. When they moved 3 states away to chase opportunities and left me behind with him, he turned abandonment into something that felt almost like a blessing. He taught me how to balance a checkbook, how compound interest worked, how to spot a scam from a mile away. "Money is loud, Sarah," he used to say, tapping his temple, "but intentions speak louder. Pay attention to those." Back then, I thought he was just preparing me for the real world. I did not realize he was preparing me for my own family. The last time I saw him alive, we had been sitting at his worn kitchen table, eating soup from chipped bowls. He had looked more tired than usual, but his eyes were sharp. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "you remember what I have taught you. And you remember that you are not obligated to trust people just because they share your blood." I laughed it off, brushed it away like it was just another one of his gloomy speeches about mortality. If I had known how close we were to the end, I would have memorized every breath. A week later, my phone rang before sunrise. I remember staring at the caller ID, seeing an unknown number from his town, and feeling my stomach drop before I even answered. "Is this Sarah?" a trembling male voice asked. "I am so sorry to tell you this, but your grandfather passed away last night." I did not scream. I did not collapse. Something inside me simply went quiet, like a light being switched off. I thanked the man, wrote down the details he gave me, and then sat on the edge of my bed in the half-dark, listening to the sound of my own breathing. The first person I should have called was my mother. Instead, I sat there for a long time, staring at her name in my contacts, remembering every time she had chosen a boyfriend, a new job, or a vacation over me. I remembered the last real conversation we had, years earlier, when she told me she could not afford to help with college because she and my husband had other priorities, right after posting pictures from a luxury resort. Still, she was my mother, or at least she used to be. My finger hovered over the screen for what felt like forever before I finally tapped call. When she picked up, her voice came bright and sweet, like nothing bad had ever happened between us. I told her the news. There was a pause, the briefest crack in that sugary tone, before she said, "Oh, honey, that is terrible. Your stepfather and I will come as soon as we can. We will help you handle everything." Everything. That word echoed in my head long after the call ended. Grief hit me in waves, but underneath it, something else began to stir. A cold, wary awareness that my parents were finally coming back into my life. Not because they missed me, but because something about Grandpa's death sounded like an opportunity. I packed my bags for the trip to his town with shaking hands, knowing that I was going to say goodbye to the only person who had ever truly shown up for me. I did not yet know that I was also walking straight into the middle of a war over his legacy. The first time I saw my parents after Grandpa died, the air felt heavier, like the house itself knew they were trouble. I had spent the morning cleaning his small living room, picking up magazines, folding blankets, trying to make the space look less like someone had just vanished from it. I was still holding one of his flannel shirts when the sound of tires crunching over gravel drifted through the front window. Their car was sleek and expensive, the kind of vehicle people buy when they want strangers to think they are winning at life. My mother stepped out in high heels and a tailored black coat, as if she were walking into a boardroom instead of the home of the man she had barely visited these last few years. "Sarah," she called, plastering on a sad smile as she approached. "Oh, sweetheart." She wrapped her arms around me before I could respond. Her perfume was sharp, a smell I had once associated with comfort and now only linked to lies. My stepfather, Mark, followed behind her, carrying nothing but his phone and a briefcase, like this was a business meeting. "I am so sorry about Dad," she said into my hair. "I know how close you two were." "You mean how close we were because you left," I thought. But I bit my tongue. We went inside. For a few minutes, things almost felt normal. My mother walked through the house, touching picture frames and knickknacks, sighing about memories she barely had. Mark stayed quiet, taking everything in with calculated, measuring eyes. Then it began. "So," he said finally, lowering himself into Grandpa's favorite armchair as if he owned it. "Has anyone said anything about a will?" There it was, not even an hour in. "I do not know much yet," I replied carefully. "His attorney called. There will be a reading in a few days. We are supposed to be there." My mother shared a quick look with Mark. It was gone in a heartbeat, but I caught it. Sharp, interested, alive. "Good," she said. "Your grandfather was very comfortable financially. It is important that everything is handled properly." Properly, another loaded word. Mark leaned forward. "You have to understand, Sarah, that handling a large estate is complicated. There are taxes, investments, legal risks. You are young. You do not have the experience to manage that kind of responsibility alone." I felt my jaw tighten. "Grandpa taught me a lot about money," I said. "He trusted me." And that is wonderful." My mother jumped in smoothly, placing a hand over mine. "But trust does not replace experience. We have built businesses. We know how to grow wealth, not waste it. If there is a substantial inheritance, it would be smarter for us to manage it for you. At least for now. Translation: let us have control." I pulled my hand back. "We do not even know what he left yet," I reminded her. "Can we focus on planning his funeral first?" Annoyance flickered across her face before she forced it back into something softer. "Of course. I just want to make sure you are protected. People take advantage of girls in your position." Girls in my position. As if she had not been the first person to walk away when I needed her. We spent the rest of the afternoon going through logistics, contacting the funeral home, choosing a date, making a list of people to call. Every time money came up, flowers, reception, travel costs, my mother would say, "Well, the estate will cover it," with a tone that sounded far too familiar, like she already had her hands on it. That night, after they left to check into a hotel, I sat alone at Grandpa's kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. His chair across from me was empty, but I could almost hear his voice. "Pay attention to intentions." When I replayed the day in my mind, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The glances between them, the way Mark had slid so easily into talking about control, the way my mother kept saying the words manage and handle like a mantra. They had not come to stand beside me in my grief. They had come to see what they could take. Grandpa's funeral was held in the small-town chapel he had attended for decades, the same place where I used to sit beside him and swing my feet above the floor because they could not reach. On the day of the service, the sky hung low and gray, pressing against the windows as people filtered in. Neighbors, old friends from the park, the retired mechanic who had once traded labor for homemade pies, they all showed up with quiet faces and stories that made my chest ache. My parents arrived late. My mother stepped through the doors in a perfectly tailored black dress, her makeup flawless, her expression a practiced mix of sorrow and composure. Mark walked beside her in a dark suit, his eyes already scanning the room, assessing, calculating. They sat in the front row, close enough to the casket to look devoted in photos, far enough from me that I could pretend I did not notice the way my mother checked her phone between hymns. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled around the piece of paper I had folded and unfolded so many times, the crease had nearly torn through. I walked up to the podium and set the page down, but when I opened my mouth, the words that came out were not the ones I had written. Grandpa never measured family by blood, I said, my voice echoing softly through the chapel. He measured it by who showed up. He believed love was proven in the small, consistent ways. The rides to school, the late-night talks, the people who stay when there is nothing to gain. I saw my mother's shoulders stiffen, just slightly. He taught me that integrity matters more than image, that money can reveal who you really are, not change you into someone else. And he told me, over and over, to stand up for myself, even if that meant standing alone. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep going. So I am going to honor him the way he would want, by protecting what he worked for, and by refusing to let anyone twist his legacy into something ugly. I did not look directly at my parents, but I did not need to. I could feel their eyes on me like heat. When the service ended, people moved in small clusters, sharing memories and offering quick hugs. I was talking to one of Grandpa's old hiking buddies when I heard raised voices behind me. Overreacting, Mark was saying, his tone low but tense. She is grieving. Once the will is read, we will get this sorted. My mother hissed back, what if he left everything to her? You know how stubborn he was. He never forgave us for that investment thing. I stepped closer, staying just out of sight behind a column, my heart thudding. Mark's jaw flexed. We will contest it. We can claim undue influence, mental decline, something. Judges hate seeing that much money go to someone so young. Once we are in court, we can paint her as unstable. You already have that old incident from when she dropped out of college. We will make them believe she is not capable. My stomach turned. So that was the plan. Not grief, not reconciliation, strategy. For a moment, I could not move. It was like being 12 again, overhearing them argue about custody, realizing I was just another item to be negotiated. Only this time, it was not my childhood they were bargaining over. It was every dream Grandpa had worked his entire life to give me. I stepped around the corner. They both froze when they saw me. My friends are still here, I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. If you are going to talk about me like I am not in the room, at least wait until after you have left the building. The color crept up my mother's neck. Sarah, that is not what this is, she said quickly. We are just worried about you. These decisions are complicated. We do not want you to be taken advantage of. Funny, I replied. That is exactly what I am trying to avoid. We stared at each other for a long second, an invisible line drawn between us. Tomorrow, Mark said finally, his tone cooler, more controlled. We will meet with the attorney. We will get clarity, and then we will make decisions. Together. Together? As if that word had ever meant anything safe in our family. I nodded once, more to end the conversation than to agree. Then I turned away and went back to the people who had actually shown up for Grandpa in life, not just in death. By the time the last car pulled out of the parking lot, my decision was made. If my parents wanted a fight over his legacy, they were going to find out I was not the scared, eager-to-please girl they had walked away from years ago. I was someone who had learned from the best how to hold my ground when money started talking. The attorney's office looked exactly how I imagined the inside of a serious decision. Too quiet, too polished, and full of things I could not afford to break. Books lined the walls in heavy shelves, their spines dark and serious. A single framed picture of Grandpa with the attorney, Mr. Harris, sat on the corner of his desk. In it, Grandpa was laughing, his arms slung across the older man's shoulders. Seeing that photo steadied me more than any deep breath ever could. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Harris said, folding his hands. "I know this is a difficult time, but your father was very clear about how he wanted his affairs handled." My mother gave him a practiced, grateful smile. "Of course, we just want to honor his wishes," she replied. I almost laughed. Mark shifted in his chair, angled slightly forward. "We are eager to hear what he decided," he said. Mr. Harris opened a thick folder, slid out several pages, and began to read. First came the formalities: full name, date, statements about sound mind and body. Then he spoke my name. "To my granddaughter, Sarah," he read, "who stood by me when others chose distance, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my home, my investments, and all accounts in my name, currently valued at approximately $4,850,000. The number hung in the air like a physical object. I felt my lungs forget how to work. I knew Grandpa had been comfortable, but hearing the amount out loud was something else entirely. My mother's fingers, resting neatly folded in her lap, twitched. Mark's eyes sharpened, their polite filter dropping for half a second. Mr. Harris continued, "It is my wish that she use these resources to build the life she chooses, to pursue education, independence, and stability. She has earned my trust." My throat tightened. He had not just left me money, he had left me a statement. "And to my daughter Claire and her husband, Mark," Mr. Harris went on, "I leave the sum of $1,000 each. This is a deliberate and considered decision. In recent years, their priorities have made clear that our values no longer align." The words landed like a slap. "What?" My mother's mask cracked. "That cannot be right. He knew how hard we have been working. He knew we have obligations. He cannot just cut us out like that." "Mrs. Collins," Mr. Harris said, his tone firm but not unkind. "This will was updated 18 months ago. Your father spoke at length about his reasons. My job is to carry them out." Her face flushed a deep, angry red. "So he thought my entire life was worth $1,000? She demanded. Mark jumped in. "This seems incredibly unbalanced. How do we know he was not pressured? He was old. He had health issues. People get confused. We may need to have this reviewed." There it was. The angle. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. "Your father anticipated that possibility. There is a clause included at the end of the document regarding any challenge to his wishes. For now, I will simply say this. Contesting the will not benefit you." My mother narrowed her eyes. "Are you threatening us with my own father's words?" "I am informing you of the legal consequences he put in place," he replied calmly. "If you choose to move forward, those consequences will be enforced." I looked at the last page of the will, the final lines written in Grandpa's precise handwriting. Mr. Harris had placed it face down in front of him, his palm covering the bottom third, as if he did not want anyone to jump ahead. There was something there, something my parents did not know about yet. My mother shot to her feet. "This is insane," she snapped. "He would never do this to me. I am his only child." Mr. Harris did not flinch. "He was very aware of that, Mrs. Collins." She turned on me. "You are not really going to accept this, are you, Sarah? You are going to share. That money belongs to all of us. It is family money. My heart pounded. For a split second, the old version of me, the one who always said yes, who always tried to keep the peace, rose up in my chest. Then I pictured Grandpa at that kitchen table, reminding me that love and obligation are not the same thing. I am going to do what he asked me to do, I said quietly. I am going to use it to build my life. I am not signing anything over. The room fell silent. Mark's voice, when it came, was soft, but edged like a blade. Then you leave us no choice. We will challenge this. In court. My mother nodded, breathing hard. We will prove he was manipulated. We will prove you are not fit to handle that kind of responsibility. You will not get away with this. I held her gaze. I am not the one trying to go against his wishes. We walked out of the office in different directions. They headed straight to their car, talking hurriedly into their phones, already strategizing. I stepped onto the sidewalk and looked up at the sky, feeling like the ground had shifted under my feet. I had just gained more money than I had ever imagined, and at the same time, I had declared war on the two people who were supposed to be my family. I did not know yet what was written in the final lines of that will, but one thing was already clear. If my parents wanted to drag me into court, Grandpa had made sure they would not be the only ones taking a risk. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Tuesday, folded neatly in a thick white envelope that looked too innocent for what it carried. I had just come back from the grocery store when I saw them stuffed into Grandpa's old mailbox, my name printed in clean, official letters. For one stupid second, I thought it might be some final piece of paperwork from the bank or the utility company. Then I saw the return address, the county courthouse. My hands went cold. Inside, in the stiff language of people who never have to deal with the consequences of their words, it said that my mother and her husband were formally contesting my grandfather's will. They were claiming he had been unduly influenced and no longer of sound mind when he decided to leave me the bulk of his estate. They were asking the court to throw out his last wishes. I stood in the driveway with the wind cutting across my face and read the words over and over, each sentence pushing deeper under my skin. By the time I reached the end, my fingers were shaking so badly the pages rustled like dry leaves. There, at the bottom, were their signatures. It felt like being disowned all over again, only this time they had put it in writing. I took the papers straight to Mr. Harris. He scanned them without much surprise, only a quiet sigh leaving his chest. I expected something like this, he said. Your mother was very angry after the reading. People don't always accept consequences gracefully. This says they want the entire will thrown out, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What happens if they win? If they succeed, he replied, the court could reinstate a previous version of the will. Or, if there is no earlier document that satisfies legal standards, the estate might be distributed under intestacy laws. In either case, your inheritance would almost certainly be reduced or divided. So Grandpa's wishes just stop mattering? I asked. He looked up, meeting my eyes. Only if we let them, he said. Fortunately, your grandfather was not naive. He planned for this. He tapped the folder on his desk, the same one he had used during the first reading. His last will contains a no-contest clause. It's a provision that penalizes anyone who challenges his wishes. You mentioned that, I said slowly, but you didn't read it out loud. I did not, he agreed. He asked that the full clause only be entered into the record if a challenge was actually filed. It is unusually strong. I suspect your mother will regret triggering it. A chill ran down my spine. How strong? Strong enough that when the judge reaches the final section at the hearing, he said, your mother is going to understand exactly how seriously your grandfather took this. I thought of her in that office, eyes blazing, insisting she would not accept $1,000 as her worth. I thought of Mark, already talking about painting me as unstable, as unfit, as easy to manipulate. Can they really convince a judge I controlled him? I asked. He was the one teaching me how to handle money. He took care of me. Mr. Harris folded his hands. Courts do not like to invalidate wills without solid evidence. Your grandfather documented his decisions carefully. We have medical evaluations from close to the time of the last signing. We have financial records showing his mental clarity. And, Sarah, he opened a smaller folder and pulled out a sealed USB drive in a clear evidence bag. We also have this. I frowned. What is it? A video, he said. Your grandfather recorded it the same day he signed the updated will. He wanted something the court could see and hear if anyone tried to claim he wasn't thinking clearly. He explains, in his own words, why he made the choices he did. It is not legally required, but judges take this kind of thing seriously. I swallowed hard. You have had that this whole time? It was to be used only if necessary, he said. Now it is necessary. He slid the bag back into the folder. You need an attorney who specializes in estate litigation. I can recommend someone, and my office will work closely with them. But you need to be sure, Sarah. Contesting a will is ugly. Defending it is not much cleaner. Your relationship with your parents, it will not survive this. I almost laughed. What relationship? I asked. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, he said. Then we will fight. Within a week, I was sitting in another office. This one younger, sharper, lined with modern art instead of framed diplomas. My new attorney, Ms. Patel, was efficient and calm in a way I clung to like a life raft. They are arguing undue influence, she said, skimming the complaint. They will try to say you isolated him, turned him against them, manipulated his decisions. Our job is to show the opposite, that you were simply the one who stayed when they didn't. She glanced up at me. Can you be honest with me? Did you ever pressure him about his money? Hint that he should leave things to you? I shook my head. If anything, I tried not to talk about it. He was the one who brought it up. He just kept saying he wanted to set things right in case anything happened. Good, she said. Judges can sense sincerity. We are going to lean heavily on documentation and his own voice. The fact that your mother and stepfather have a history of financial trouble will not help them. Wait, I said. You know about that? She nodded. Mr. Harris provided financial statements your grandfather kept. There were loans he gave them that were never repaid. Investments he warned them against that they made anyway. He kept records. More than most people his age. I pictured Grandpa again at the kitchen table, his meticulous handwriting covering yellow legal pads, every dollar accounted for. He had not been paranoid. He had been preparing. Over the next few weeks, my life became a tight loop of work, calls and memories I would rather not dig up. Ms. Patel had me gather everything. Old texts from my mother, emails, voicemails, bank statements, photos from holidays where Grandpa and I were alone. She had me write out a timeline of every major thing my parents had missed. Recitals, birthdays, graduation. It felt petty, listing them like charges on an invoice, but she explained why it mattered. They are going to paint you as a schemer, she said. We need to show a pattern. They pulled away, he stepped up. You became his primary emotional support. That is not manipulation. That is abandonment on their part. When I wasn't digging through drawers and digital archives, I was replaying their voices in my head. We will challenge this. We will prove you are not fit. Sometimes the fear hit hard. What if the judge believed them? What if he looked at me and saw the girl who dropped out of college for a semester when anxiety swallowed her whole, not the woman who crawled back and finished her degree the hard way? What if Grandpa's last act of protection became the thing that tore what was left of our family completely apart? On the nights when sleep wouldn't come, I would sit alone at the table and open the envelope Grandpa had given Mr. Harris to give me when things got noisy, as he had put it. Inside was a letter in his careful script. Sarah, if you are reading this, it means people are arguing about things I can no longer control with my own voice. I'm sorry it has come to that, but I am not surprised. I have watched how your mother treats responsibility. I have watched how you treat it. I chose accordingly. You are not greedy for accepting what I've left you. You are not cruel for protecting it. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. If they come after you, remember this. I am the one they are really angry at, not you. Don't let their guilt wear your face. Love, Grandpa. I read that letter so many times the creases began to fray. My mother did not call me once during those weeks. Everything came through lawyers now. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. When I tried to imagine her as a little girl sitting in Grandpa's kitchen, I could almost see the version of her who might have been kind once. But the woman I was facing in court was not that girl. She was someone who believed she was entitled to anything she could grab, even if it meant ripping it out of her daughter's hands. A month later, we were back in the same courthouse where I had first heard the number $450,000. Only this time, we were not there to listen. We were there to fight. The hearing room was larger than the one where the will had been read, with high ceilings and a raised bench where the judge sat overlooking everything. The air smelled like paper and nerves. My mother sat at one table with her attorney and Mark. I sat at the other with Ms. Patel and Mr. Harris. She did not look at me. The bailiff called the case. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes behind thin glasses, glanced over the paperwork with a face that gave nothing away. We are here on a petition to contest the last will and testament of the late Richard Collins, she said. The petitioners argue that the decedent lacked capacity and was unduly influenced by his granddaughter, the primary beneficiary. Defense maintains the will is valid and seeks enforcement of all provisions, including a no contest clause. We will hear opening statements. My mother's attorney stood first. All practiced concern and measured outrage. He talked about sudden changes in the will, about estrangement and confusion, about an elderly man allegedly being cut off from his only daughter by a younger relative with emotional leverage. He did not say my name often. When he did, it sounded like an accusation. Ms. Patel's opening was shorter. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mr. Collins was clear, consistent, and deliberate, she said calmly. It will show that he was not manipulated, but disappointed. That he adjusted his will not because of confusion, but because of clarity. Clarity about who actually showed up for him in the final years of his life. You will also see that he anticipated exactly this type of challenge and made his position unmistakable, both in writing and on video. When she sat down, my mother looked rattled for the first time. The rest of the day blurred into a series of questions and exhibits. Mr. Harris testified first, describing Grandpa's visits to his office, the way he spoke about his daughter and me, the care he took in updating his documents. He was very specific, Mr. Harris said. He did not want his daughter controlling Sarah's inheritance. He said, and I quote, "If they try to bully her after I am gone, I want the law standing between them." My parents' attorney objected, muttering something about hearsay. The judge allowed it. Next came the medical records. Evaluations from Grandpa's doctor confirming he had been mentally competent near the time of the will's signing. The doctor testified by video, looking tired but firm. His memory was not perfect, she said. But he understood his finances, his relationships, and the consequences of his decisions. He knew exactly what he wanted. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, gripping the edges of the wooden chair until my knuckles turned white. Ms. Patel took me through my history with Grandpa, how I'd come to live with him, how he'd stepped into the space my parents had left empty, how he never once pressured me to do anything with his money. What did he say when he talked about his estate if he brought it up? She asked. He said he wanted to make up for what I'd lost, I replied. Not just money, time, stability. He told me the money was not a reward for being perfect. It was security. So I wouldn't have to depend on people who had already proven they weren't dependable. And did you ever ask him to change his will? She said. No. Did you threaten to cut him off if he didn't? I almost laughed at how backward that sounded. No. If anyone was at risk of being cut off, it was me. He was the only family I had left. On cross-examination, my mother's attorney tried to chip away at that image. He brought up my semester off from college, my old therapist, my panic attacks. Isn't it true, he said, that you were emotionally unstable during this period? That you leaned on your grandfather heavily? That you depended on him for housing, money, and emotional support? Yes, I said, because my parents weren't around. He didn't like that answer. By the time the judge called for a recess, my throat was raw and my head pounded. I stepped into the hallway, leaning against the cool wall as the buzzing in my ears slowly faded. Across the hall, my mother stood with her lawyer, her face tight and pale. For a second, her eyes met mine. There was something there that almost looked like regret. Then she turned away. When we went back into the courtroom, the judge cleared her throat. "We will now move to the remaining exhibits," she said. "This includes a video recording prepared by the decedent and, if necessary, review of the final provision in his will." Her gaze swept over both tables. "I suggest everyone pay close attention. What comes next will determine whether this matter moves forward or ends today." I felt my heart slam against my ribs. We were getting closer to that final line on the page. The lights in the courtroom dimmed slightly as a screen was pulled down along one wall. The clerk fussed with a laptop, and after a moment, my grandfather's face appeared. Slightly grainy, but unmistakably him. He was sitting at Mr. Harris's desk, wearing his favorite faded blue shirt. The date stamp in the corner matched the day he signed the updated will. "Name for the record?" Mr. Harris's voice asked from behind the camera. "Richard Collins," Grandpa replied, his voice steady. "Date of birth, July 18th, 1941. Today is—" He squinted, then chuckled. "You say it, Harris. You've got the calendar." Mr. Harris supplied the date. Grandpa nodded. "I'm making this recording because I'm not naive," he said, folding his hands on the desk. "I've just signed a new will. In it, I have left the majority of my estate to my granddaughter, Sarah. I have left my daughter, Claire, and her husband, Mark, a token amount. This was not an impulsive decision." He looked straight into the camera, eyes sharp. "My daughter and I have had a strained relationship for many years," he continued. "She chose a different life. That happens. What bothers me is not that she moved away. It's that when I needed her, or when her own child needed her, she consistently chose herself first. Vacations instead of visits. New cars instead of loan repayments. Excuses instead of effort." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother flinch. "I don't dislike her," he went on, "but I do not trust her with large sums of money. I have watched how quickly it runs through her fingers. I have watched how often she and her husband look for shortcuts. I have bailed them out of more than one bad decision. I will not do it from the grave." He smiled then, a softer expression reserved just for me. "Sarah, if you're watching this," he said, "I hope you remember that I did this because I believe in you, not because you asked. You never did. You were the one who stayed. You sat with me when my knees hurt too much to walk. You drove me to appointments. You listened. You learned. You gave more than you took, and I am proud of you." My vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. "To any court reviewing this," he added, his voice firm again, "I state clearly, I am of sound mind. I understand the nature and extent of my estate. I understand who my heirs are. And I am choosing, freely, to leave my wealth to the person who earned my trust, not the people who assumed they were entitled to it." He paused, then gave a small shrug. "If that upsets them, that's their problem," he said, not a sign that I was confused. The video ended on that half-amused expression I knew so well. The screen went dark. Silence settled over the room. The judge looked down at the paperwork in front of her for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her tone had changed. "The court has heard testimony from the drafting attorney, reviewed medical records from the decedent's physician, heard from the primary beneficiary, and viewed the decedent's own recorded statement, she said. Taken together, this evidence strongly supports the conclusion that Mr. Collins was competent and acted of his own free will when executing his last testament. She turned her gaze toward my parents' table. The petitioners have produced no credible proof of undue influence, she continued. Disappointment with the contents of a will is not the same as evidence of manipulation. Nor is a long-distance relationship standing alone proof that the decedent was isolated against his wishes. My mother's attorney shifted in his seat. Your Honor, if we could, you will have your moment, the judge cut in. But first, there is one more matter before the court, the no contest clause. My mother's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The judge picked up the will, printed in enlarged, double-spaced text for the record, and flipped to the final page. I recognized it. It was the same sheet I had watched her read from weeks earlier. She scanned down to the bottom, then adjusted her glasses. Mr. Collins included a specific provision dealing with any potential challenge to this document, she said. Per his instructions, it was to be read into the record only if a legal contest was actually filed. That condition has now been met. She cleared her throat. If any beneficiary named in this will, she began, directly or indirectly contests, disputes, or seeks to overturn any provision of this document in a court of law or through any legal process, I hereby direct the following. First, any gift, bequest, or interest otherwise left to that beneficiary, including any token amount, shall be immediately revoked. Such revoked share shall instead pass to my granddaughter, Sarah Collins, or, if she declines it, to the charitable trust described below. My mother's face drained of color. Second, the judge continued, in the event of a contest brought by my daughter, Claire, or her husband, Mark, I authorize and instruct my executor to release to law enforcement and relevant regulatory agencies all documentation attached to this will as Exhibit A. These documents concern prior financial misconduct, unpaid debts, and potential fraud involving the aforementioned individuals. My estate shall fund any reasonable legal action to recover losses or cooperate with investigations arising from those matters. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother swallowed hard. Mark's grip tightened around his pen until it snapped with a soft crack. Third, the judge read, for a period of 10 years following my death, my granddaughter is expressly forbidden to transfer, gift, or assign more than 1% of her inheritance, in total, to my daughter or her husband, directly or indirectly. This is to ensure that no pressure, emotional or otherwise, compels her to undo my wishes under the guise of generosity. My breath caught. I had known Grandpa wanted to protect me. I had not realized he had gone this far. The judge reached the last lines. If my daughter reads this and feels betrayed, she read, I ask her to consider how many chances she was given while I was alive. I will not watch her waste another one from the grave. Actions have consequences. This is mine. She lowered the paper. For the record, she said evenly, the court finds that the petitioners, by filing this contest, have triggered the no contest clause. As such, under the explicit terms of the will, they forfeit their token bequests. Those amounts will instead pass to Miss Collins, along with authority for the executor to proceed as directed regarding Exhibit A. My mother lurched to her feet. Wait, she said, voice raw. Wait, please. He can't do that. He can't take everything. He knew we had problems, but he was supposed to help. He was supposed to... This is not fair. Mrs. Collins, the judge replied, your father had the legal right to dispose of his property as he saw fit. He documented his reasons. He confirmed his capacity. You chose to challenge his decisions despite being warned of potential consequences. The court's job is to enforce his wishes, not rewrite them. Tears spilled down my mother's cheeks. Her polished composure was gone, stripped away to reveal something desperate underneath. She turned toward me, eyes wide. Sarah, she said hoarsely, tell her you don't want this. Tell her you won't let them do this. They're going to go after us. They're going to drag everything up. Please, just give me one chance. We can make a deal. We can figure something out. You can say you don't want the clause enforced. Every person in that room seemed to turn toward me at once. For a heartbeat, I saw her not as the woman who had abandoned me, not as the person who had tried to take what Grandpa left me, but as a human being terrified of consequences she never believed would actually arrive. You can ask your counsel to address the court, the judge said, her tone cool. But this clause is binding. Once triggered, it is not a matter of Ms. Collins's personal preference. Ms. Patel rose. Your Honor, my client will, of course, comply with the terms of the will, she said. Mr. Collins's intentions could not be clearer. We see no legal or ethical basis to disregard them. My mother's shoulders sagged as if someone had cut invisible strings. For the reasons stated, the judge continued, the petition to contest the will is denied with prejudice. The no contest clause is enforced. The executor is authorized to proceed under the instructions related to Exhibit A. This matter is concluded. The gavel struck wood with a sharp, final sound. My mother crumpled back into her chair, hands covering her face. Mark sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with the fury of someone who had bet everything and lost. My own emotions were a tangle I could barely name. Relief, sharp and blinding. Grief, still raw and present. A sick twist of guilt, because even though they had done this to themselves, they were still my family. And now they were going to pay for their choices in ways I couldn't soften, even if I wanted to. And underneath it all, like a steady current, a fierce, quiet sense of vindication. Grandpa had seen them clearly. He had seen me clearly. And in the end, the system had listened. Outside the courthouse, reporters snapped photos they would probably delete later when they realized this wasn't a celebrity case. My parents hurried past them, heads down, my mother still wiping at her face, Mark barking something at their lawyer. I stayed on the steps for a long moment, feeling the sun on my face. For the first time since all of this had begun, I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of something falling apart. I felt like I was standing at the beginning of something I could build. In the months that followed, the fallout unfolded exactly the way Grandpa must have anticipated. Exhibit A turned out to be more detailed than I ever imagined. Records of loans never repaid, emails where Mark had encouraged Grandpa to mislead investors, bank statements that suggested funds had been diverted from a small business partnership years earlier. Mr. Harris handed everything over to the authorities, just as he had been instructed. Investigations opened. Old partners came forward. My parents hired new lawyers, then cheaper ones when the retainers ran out. They sold the fancy car, then the boat, then the house. I did not attend the hearings that followed. I didn't need to be there to know how they ended. Court documents and quiet updates from Mr. Harris painted enough of a picture. There were settlements, there were fines. There was eventually a plea deal for Mark that included probation and a financial restitution plan that would take him years to climb out from under. My mother was not charged with anything criminal, but she was named in enough civil cases that her reputation evaporated. The people she used to impress with her clothes and her vacations stopped returning her calls. For the first time in her life, she was forced to live within her means. Every so often, an email would slip past the spam filters. Long, rambling messages that started with anger, slid into blame, and sometimes ended in something that tried to look like remorse. You didn't have to let them use the evidence, she wrote once. You could have stopped it. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before I finally settled on the only one that felt true. I didn't start this, I wrote. Grandpa finished it. I just refused to get in his way. After that, I set up a filter that sent any new messages from her directly to a folder I didn't open. I moved into a small apartment in the city with peeling paint and terrible parking, but it was mine. I went back to school. this time without having to choose between rent and textbooks. I met with a financial planner the firm recommended and set up the charitable trust Grandpa had mentioned, a fund in his name to help kids who had aged out of foster care get through college without depending on people who never really wanted them. Sometimes, when I sign the paperwork to release a semester's worth of scholarships, I can almost hear him. "You learn the lessons, kiddo." On the anniversary of his death, I drove back to the town where it had all started. The park where we used to walk was the same. The same worn benches, the same path lined with trees that shed their leaves in thick, crunchy blankets. I sat on our favorite bench, the one with the crooked slat near the end, and let the quiet settle around me. I thought about the courtroom, about my mother's eyes when the judge read that final line, about the way her voice had cracked when she begged for one chance, not to be better, but to avoid consequences. I thought about the little girl she must have been once, before money became the only language she spoke. I would probably never know exactly when that shift happened. It hurt, but I could live with not knowing. What I couldn't live with was letting her drag me into the same pattern. "I miss you," I said softly, staring at the empty space beside me. A breeze stirred the leaves on the ground, carrying the faint smell of pine. It was the closest thing to an answer I was going to get. I stood up, brushed off my jeans, and looked around one last time. My life would always carry the shape of what my parents had done. The absences, the betrayals, the way they had tried to turn my inheritance into a battlefield. But it would also carry the imprint of what Grandpa had done instead. The late-night talks, the hard lessons, the final ruthless line on a piece of paper that turned their greed back on them. Walking back to my car, I realized something I wished I could tell every person who had ever been told to forgive and forget for the sake of family. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is accept that blood is not a free pass. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge is not watching the people who hurt you burn. It is simply refusing to let them spend the rest of your life for you.